In a time when women's lives were defined by the men in them, first by their fathers and then by their husbands, what became of them when they were left alone? Written in 1894, this story follows Louise Mallard, a woman who receives shocking news of her husband's death and the hour that follows. This is The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her, as gently as possible, the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences. Her husband's friend Richards was near there too. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when the intelligence of the railroad disaster was received. Bentley Mallard's name led the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of this truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend from relaying the message. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once with sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She could see in the open square before her the houses, tops of trees, all aquiver with the spring of new life. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows twittered in the eaves. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came into her throat and shook her. She was young, with a fair, calm face whose eyes bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, gaze fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that possessed her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will. When she abandoned herself, a little word escaped her slightly parted lips. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright, her pulse fast, and the coursing blood warmed and soothed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were, or were not, a monstrous joy that held her. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the face that had never looked save upon her with love, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years that would belong to her absolutely, and she would spread out her arms to welcome them. There would be no one to live for during these coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have the right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. Any kind intention or cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime. And yet she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? Free! body and soul free. Josephine was kneeling before the door, imploring for admission. Louise, open the door. I beg you, open the door. Louise, you will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away, I am not making myself ill. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday that she shuddered that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped at her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richards stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Brentley Mallard, carrying his gripsack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of the accident and did not know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry and at Richard's quick movement to shield him from the view of his wife. But Richards was too late. When the doctors came, they said she died of heart disease, of the joy that kills.